So we wanted to talk about our collaborations, and there have been quite a few.
Our associations and collaborations.
Our friendship. We could talk about that too, where we first met and all that. But I thought I wanted to make sure that I mentioned this collaboration, which was in this journal, a poetry and arts journal called Vanitas, that I published and edited for about 10 years. And this was issue number 5. And it has a cover images by a Swiss filmmaker named Hannes Schupbach. If you ever get to see his films, I'd recommend them. He never, or I guess I shouldn't say never, but in the ones I've seen, which are quite a few, he doesn't use any sound at all.
Really?
Yeah, so it's kind of very interesting. And the images are very beautiful, and the editing is, of course, important. And there's sometimes silences, in other words, like moments of black, and then goes back to images. But he's really into this idea of not using sound.
Are they abstract films, or do they have a narrative?
They're quite abstract. I mean, sometimes one of them is, he films his mother, but it's not about his mother. I mean, you don't learn anything about her life or anything, but you just see her in the garden, and it's very abstract. Yes, you see images of the garden, you see images of her. Another one is actually a wedding of some friends of his, but again, it's not like the drama of the moment when they get married. You just see images of people, and sometimes, and again, images of nature and water, and then images of a party, but it goes by very quickly. You don't really have a chance to grab onto anything. So this is, this
really interesting.
It's interesting. And
yeah, that was a beautiful image. I remember the image vividly. I mean, I do have the magazine, but I remember having seen it for bits.
Those are his images, and then so it's all these people on it. And I started this magazine in, I guess, I want to say 2003 or 4. And it was partially in reaction to the presidency of George W. Bush.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something, I mean, I feel like there's always a lot we can do in terms of activism, in terms of, protesting, and also like right now we're trying to get people to vote in this presidential election that's coming up very soon here. But then I feel like, John Lennon said, like, well, we use what our craft is, and in his case was songs, So in our case, it's poetry or music, or But I felt like, well, we could also do a publication, and the publication was like, part of the idea of it was to be a forum for international voices, and we tried to get people from various parts of the world, and also from different art forms, like not just writers. So we would have writings by dancers, writings by filmmakers, like Hannes, writings by visual artists, and writings by musicians. And so for this issue, Sarah had sent me something she wrote, and I thought it was really great. So I asked if we could publish it, and she said yes. It's called Walking Down Brick Lane. And this is the beginning of it. I'll read it. Walking down Brick Lane, East London, one evening in early 2001, I heard my name repeatedly coming from a sound system on the roof of the Truman Building. Sarah Sarhandi, Sarah Sarhandi. I'd been spotted. The beat was kicking. Talvin Singh was partying at his studio. We'd played and recorded together. I'd made a track he played tabla on. Hanif Qureshi read over it from blue lines. A strange, swirling orchestral piece of music. It ends with the words, "The universe is dirt." And then I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. This part says, the Asian underground became visible in mainstream culture. A new tribe appeared around this scene, an extended family. There were people with Muslim parents, Jewish and Sikh heritage, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, different combinations of any of this ancestry. And then you go on to describe it in more depth. And then this was written in 2005, and so near the end, you say, now I feel my dreams are being smashed. The earth is screaming, hurt and cracking. People have become afraid of each other. There's blood everywhere, and preachers of both the sacred and the secular threaten us and suck joy and air from life, and the weather has gone AWOL. I'm hurt and disappointed. I feel betrayed. The innocence of that time before 9/11 in East London is gone. But there's a string of tiny lights, each one a beacon of hope, a clear-sighted friend, a poet, a kind stranger, a loved one, a wise person, an inspiring piece of art or music, sweet-natured child. I pray that eventually the darkness will fade and that love and care will prevail.
It's nice hearing
Right.
that. I haven't heard it for a long time.
It's very powerful, and I wanted to ask you, hearing it now, and it's, you wrote it, I guess, in 2005, and we published it in 2010, and now it's 2020. How much do you feel has stayed the same, and how much has changed, has gotten worse, maybe, or, is there still little lights of hope?
Yeah, well, I just made that piece of music called Heart, and I think I said a chain of strength. So I'm quite keen on finding the string of little lights, or the chain of hope in darkness, or just not even in darkness. I do search it out. I think times are very different now. I think then it was a shock what happened, 9/11, and then the war on terror and everything that brought, Guantanamo, even in England, that affected me deeply, just knowing that was all going on. And obviously I'm half Pakistani, and so Pakistan was drawn into the war on terror.
Yeah.
And badly affected by the war on terror. And I felt quite a lot of fear as someone who is of joint Pakistani and British heritage. I was quite afraid at that time. It brought up a lot for me about, I don't know, the perception of the Islamic world, or, or the reality of it, or the perception of it, or what was going on there between America and in America. It was a really shocking moment. But I think now it's an even sort of odder time in a way, because there's no clear, I don't know how to put it, there doesn't seem to be a clear enemy, as it were. But there is, as far as, war on terror or something like this, or 9/11 and buildings being blown up or whatever, so shocking, iconic buildings in New York. But in a way, we've become used to this sort of fearful world, I think. I don't know if you agree, but, on a global scale, we seem to be in a very difficult times. There's a lot going on, there's a lot at stake, there's global warming, there's species being wiped out, there's, humans have made a mess on this earth. And then now there's this invisible enemy, the virus. It's quite shocking in a way.
Well,
that's a different kind of shock. It's like a slow, I suppose the pandemic is shock, is something that came on very suddenly almost, and is another kind of shocking moment.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. And I think it changed everything. And I think that a lot of the changes are permanent. But so talking about,
Can I ask you what you mean when you say a lot of the changes are permanent? Do you mean to the sort of psyche of the human race, or what do you mean?
I do. I feel like there's been a lot of isolation in this period, and I just feel like as much as humans are social animals and are going to want to come out and socialize, there's also going to be more of a reliance on this kind of other way of communicating, which in some ways is good. I mean, we're having this conversation right now, which is really nice, you know, so, but I think we're going to also maybe have conversations like this with people who are 10 streets away from us or something like that, you know.
Yeah, that's not so great.
That's not so great. And I think there's going to be a lot of, and I mean, and I think there should be a lot of fear, you know, or kind of like a respectful awareness of the dangers of, you know, like the next pandemic, the next Sandy, like that very bad hurricane that hit New York City. You know, the fires that are happening now in the western part of the United States, like all these things are if not caused, they're definitely exacerbated by this climate crisis that we're in. So I guess that's what I mean when I feel like but I'm interested in talking to you today, like, and this is related, like, is about how people interact, because the topic really here is collaboration and our collaborations. So maybe we should just talk about that now, but we'll keep in the back of our minds, you know, how people collaborate differently now. But we met long ago. I believe, did we meet in Edinburgh or did we meet in London?
It was in Edinburgh, yeah. When I was doing that opera installation with Damien Hirst,
Yeah.
doing the scenography or whatever, with the rats in the cages and the medicine boxes. But I think he just, yeah, so it was way back. And
what year was that?
God, don't even say, I don't know. But it was a long while back, and it was a really nice meeting, and you were with Vivian.
Yeah.
And I just remembered you. And then I think Celia Littleton, our mutual friend, showed me a pamphlet of your poems.
Okay.
And which I have, I believe, this ancient pamphlet. Yeah, it was just very thin and printed, and I really loved them. And I don't know how we got to actually work together. Did I see you in London then at something? Was it like
it was a poetry
publishers
reading
convention or something? Conway Hall, like publishers.
I think it was called, I did a reading at a place called Parasol Unit. I think that was it, in London. And you and Celia came to the reading.
Celia, yes, I think.
And I read some of the translations of Propertius. And
she
then
asked after you actually the other day when she saw.
What's that?
Post of I put a little post on Facebook about our Zoom.
Oh, good.
She asked how you are.
Oh, good. She's well. Well, and then we went out that night afterwards, and then that's when we got to talking about, you know, we could collaborate with these poems, with the translations. And so I think that was always something that intrigued both of us.
Was it particularly the poems you read, or that I was interested in, or was it, I don't remember that. I really don't remember this occasion. It's amazing. I don't remember where we went, or I'm sure we went. I don't remember. But
that was the time, because we, in any event, I remember that I read, you know, I did a poetry reading, so I read some of my own poems, but I also read some of these translations of Sextus Propertius, the first BC Roman poet, and they're these very intense, erotic love poems. And
I think I'd read some of those, and I was really taken with them.
And then that was what you caught your attention the most, and then you said, oh, well, that, you know, maybe we could do something with music, with these poems. And then I thought that would be great. And then from there, we started to think about it. And then it became a complicated process. I mean, always an enjoyable process, but complicated because these poems are not in a dramatic form. They're not in dialogues. They're always really like
they're quite lengthy, aren't they?
A lot of them are pretty long, and they're kind of like the interior monologues of this person who is the poet, but he's also very, in Propertius's poetry is, I think one of the reasons that I like it a lot is it seems like a lot of contemporary poets, especially the New York school poets like Frank O'Hara, in which there's a person talking in the poems, and that is probably literally the author, because sometimes we want to be careful and think like, well, there could be somebody talking in the poem that's not necessarily the author. But in this case, you feel like you're really getting this person from the 1st century BC and all his kind of madness that's going on in his mind regarding his love affair, principally with a woman he calls Cynthia, who's a slightly older and very sophisticated woman who's a musician and probably a poet as well, and maybe a courtesan. In one of his poems, he refers to her as weighing her boyfriend's purses, like, you know.
That could have been his.
What's that?
That could have been his envy, also, couldn't it? It could have been his anger or ire, you know, that she had over men, and say, oh, that they're rich. She's only with him because they're rich, or something like that.
Well, I think that's another thing that attracts modern audiences to these poems, is that the lifestyle feels very familiar, in the sense that, you know, they live in a city and there's a lot of fluidity. There's a lot of, you know, switching partners and, you know, different kinds of sexuality are recognized. But anyhow, that's
how it was during that time in the Roman Empire, that it was pretty loose as to what you could get up to.
Yeah, there was a lot of looseness. I mean, there was a class thing, right? Because there was slavery, and there were, you know, the upper classes, and then they were kind of more like artisans, and so it depended what class you were in. But and Propertius was more from like not the highest class, but because of his poetry, he got initiated into that group, and he was really in the circle of the Emperor Augustus.
I was really, at the time, I just, when I decided, you know, when I expressed that I was interested in working with that, I was also, it wasn't so long that I'd been producing my own music. Mm-hmm. And so I was very caught up in making sound and beats and stuff, and yeah, I was so enjoying programming and stuff, as well as playing my viola, as well as, you know, so, and I was, and actually, I think it was the fact that the poetry seemed, despite the fact, and your beautiful translation that won National American Translation Award, that beautiful translation seemed to me so, it came across as very contemporary. Mm-hmm. And so there was that, you know, it appealed to me because it was kind of in line with what I was doing musically, which was making very contemporary music, and yet with this classicism beneath it. I think that it resonated with me.
Well, I had the same exact feeling from the other side, because you started to send me probably things that you had done, but I didn't really know your musical output at that point, right? And so I liked the idea of it, but I didn't really know what it would be like. But then when you started to set some things, I realized that I really liked it a lot, and I agree with you. I feel like I know that you're classically trained, and yet you've worked in a lot of different genres. You know, what we might I'll say that again. You're classically trained as a musician, but you've worked in a lot of different genres, and you've worked in what we might call vernacular forms, and that is always very interesting to me. I mean, I guess I could say the same about me. In a way, I'm classically trained
You're
in
a
literature,
classicist. You're a
but
classic scholar. You've got to be classically trained.
yeah, well, I never.
Well, you're not trained, but you know you've been exposed.
No, I have been trained as a classicist up to a point. Like I didn't go to the full academic routine. You know, like I don't have a doctorate, and I also never studied English literature. I mean, after high school, so it's, I've had a little slightly, but yeah. But I've been classically trained in the classics, but I've also been always very drawn to poetry that works with the vernacular, basically like the way people speak. So poets like William Carlos Williams, and then others who, in a way, are his descendants, like Allen Ginsberg and Frank O'Hara and Ted Berrigan and many others, Eileen Miles, Michael Lally. So these are poets also who are, so there's this, with all of them and John Ashbery, I feel like there's
Oh
an
yeah,
interest.
John Ashbery really liked my record that CD I made with Mark Springer. He loved it.
Oh, good.
Because Danny Moynihan played it to him. I think Danny's mother was quite good friends with John Ashbery.
Yeah, they were.
Family friends. And he wrote some lovely thing and sent it to us.
Great.
He sent us a book of his poems, me and Mark. You know, we'd made that album together.
Yeah.
And he sent us a really lovely, I think Mark's probably got it, a volume of his poems with a really nice dedication.
Like he and that
his work, John Ashbery's poem.
that coterie of people who was like John Ashbery, James Schuyler, Frank O'Hara, Harry Matthews. Music was very, very important to them, you know, particularly contemporary, well, classical music, but also and romantic music, but also 20th century music, including like very contemporary music. And in those days, it was very hard to hear contemporary music. And Frank O'Hara, actually, and Harry Matthews too, they were trained as musicians. Frank O'Hara went to Harvard to major in music, but while he was there, he just poetry, and he switched his major to English literature. Yeah, so he was a very good pianist, and he played all his life. And he would, that's how he would keep up, because he was really interested in the most cutting edge composers. And so he would buy the music and play it. Like that's how he would get to hear it, because there was really no other way most of the time.
Well, weren't there sort of salons that's what I got to understand from Danny, that there were salons in New York, or there were places in New York that you could definitely, more than in London at that time, where you could go and hear contemporary music.
Well, they definitely had a lot of parties, and according to my dad, a lot of people could play the piano, but I feel like it was more fun than like a musical salon. You know what I mean? Like I don't think they were playing such and such a piece that had just come out. It was more like they were probably playing like Broadway show tunes, and people were singing, or then they might play a classical piece, you know, some Rachmaninoff. O'Hara was a big Rachmaninoff fan, so he would probably play some Rachmaninoff. I think it was more like that.
Rachmaninoff.
Oh yeah, I think it was very.
I really love Rachmaninoff. I love that piano concerto. I like putting that on if I'm on a long haul flight. You know, the very famous one.
Yeah.
That slow movement. It's really great to fly to.
But yeah, so I feel like I'm in that lineage. Like music is really, really important to me, as is, you know, visual arts, all the arts. but I feel like I studied some music. I studied music history. I studied a little bit of composition. I studied harmony.
One of the hugest influences on me as one of the first musicians I met and played with that was the biggest influence on me was after I left music college was Don Cherry.
Oh, yeah.
And I could, and he was one of the founders of jazz, and I just couldn't believe what he was doing and his attitude to music. And that for me just blew open my own understanding and perception of what I could do, kind of even unconsciously, because I didn't even realize then that I would want to create my own work.
What would you say was his attitude towards music?
Firstly, he was the best dressed musician I've ever seen in my life.
Jazz guys kind of have.
You remember this first meeting, and he had a hat and and a suit, and it was like, wow, dude. And he said, "Hello, lady." It's like, wow. And I think it was just the way he I don't know, I'd been to the Royal Academy of Music. I literally was still there when I met him. I was really young. Must have been 20 or something. And he was kind of irreverent, but at the same time, he was amazingly sensitive and skilled.
Right.
And imaginative, and he had that toy trumpet. And it was just magical, it was just, I don't know, it was something I'd listened to jazz, but I'd never met anyone like that in my life, with that sort of mix of confidence and experimentation in their work, and
have openness, right?
Openness and sensitivity and creativity. I was just blown away. And yeah. So
but I wanted to go back to what you were saying, because I totally agree. That's in a roundabout way. I was talking about this mix of what I call the erudite and the vernacular that I think we both share and draw on, and different traditions too, because you have the Pakistani tradition, or traditions, probably like this. There's always multiple traditions. That's why I feel like these terms like classical music are like very limiting. And
also a lot of it is about what you draw from the atmosphere, not even what you study, or you formally study. It's sort of what you, I mean, when I was a kid, we didn't listen to that much classical South Asian music, for example, but my dad turned everything into a kind of, sounded like some kind of a rag, like even if he sang Strangers in the Night or a Beatles song, it ended up sounding completely sort of otherworldly. And
wow.
And weirdly, when I just, when I had this collaboration with the legendary Pakistani guitar player Amir Zaki, and one piece I made before I met him, I made this piece called Karachi Dark Light. I made it on a previous trip to Karachi before I knew him, and he listened and he said to me, "Do you realize you have a perfect rag something or another in that piece?"
Wow.
And I never studied rags or anything, but I'd just done it kind of unconsciously. It was astonishing to discover that. I don't think it's always what we learn formally that informs us.
No, but it's kind of in there somehow. I feel like you have some way of, I mean, I wanted to ask you, because I feel like you use some improvisational elements when you compose, don't you? I mean, don't you?
I do. I mean, and I've got a really, really good musical memory, so I can just improvise something and then decide on it there and then, and I'll remember it. Actually,
do you record it at the time and then, or did you just do it and you know it? And
I tell you, there's a really weird thing. I've got a really good memory when it comes to viola melodies.
mm-hmm.
And I don't always need to write them down at all.
Wow.
But when it comes to, say, that piece Harp that I just made,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't write any of that down at all. And then I can repeat those parts perfectly. I don't need to have them written down. But with the piano, I can't remember the simplest tune and I have to write it down. So it's kind of odd.
And when you, obviously when you write parts for people, you put them in standard.
I have to put them in and write them down, or I record them and then you know, can write them down later. And the other thing is that sometimes it's just a sound that will trigger for me a whole melody, or just hear like an electronic sound and it will trigger up, like that piece Heart. I had been working on this kind of electronic sound and I had it in my library and it was quite old and I'd forgotten about it, and I listened to it and then a whole piece just kind of went whoop, like that.
Tell me about, again, about the piece that, so we started working on this collaboration that we're calling While There's Light. You're setting Propertius's poetry and we're making it into an opera, so we have it, I worked on a libretto and we've divided it into arias and choruses and sometimes duets. But tell me a little bit about the piece that you wrote that included the sounds of bombs falling. Tell me that story again, because I think that's very evocative.
Yeah, that was quite shock, sort of. Well, I just had dinner, and I think there were a few people around, and then I went into the room where I was working, and I had inadvertently left on a Facebook feed, which it was somebody's Facebook page, and I think I was aware of this Operation Cast Lead or something it was called. It was that 2013 or something like that, or 12 or 13, and it was Israel was dropping bombs on Gaza, and someone in Gaza had put a microphone on the windowsill. Mm-hmm. And so when I walked into this room, and I have big speakers, and I'd left them on, and I don't know why nobody complained, but they hadn't. No one in the house minded, and there was this sound coming out of the speakers of literally this bombing in some street in Gaza. So you could hear everything. You could hear the drones. They were very noisy and coming and going and coming and going. You could hear dogs howling because they were frightened. You didn't really hear, and you didn't really hear people much. It was just this sort of generalized sound of, and you could hear bombs going off, and it was chilling, and it was weird. It was like suddenly this thing was in my room, and I sort of immediately thought, oh my God, this is such a strange and exceptional noise. I must record it. So I did. I think I just switched the microphone. You know, I've got, it's over there actually, the big microphone, and I just, a nice quality mic, and I just quickly switched it on and, you know, pulled up Logic on my computer and recorded it. And then you had given me this piece of music, or we decided on this piece of music. So I had a performance of my work at King's Place in London, and I was preparing some things. And so I decided to use that sound for this aria called the Roman Callimachus, wasn't it? We called it Roman Callimachus.
Yeah.
And Jamie McDermott, who's an amazing singer. I'd seen him sing at Aubra an opera by David Tupe, and I thought he had the perfect voice, and so I wrote for him that music. So basically he sang, and then I added string parts and things. So I added the viola, I added some other instrumentation. But the thing that carried it really was that sound in his vocal line. And I think it worked well.
I was wondering, last time we were looking at some actual texts. So I was trying to see if I tried to pull up some texts. I'm trying to find that one now. Let's see, chorus.
I got it actually here.
You have it?
Yeah, I got it on my phone. It's on an email here. Oh, I don't know if I've got that one actually.
Yeah, I have it here. Although this.
No, I've got the other ones. I've got Where There's Light and Hadrian. I haven't got that one. You got that?
This one, yeah, I found an unedited version of it, but this was the one we were talking about where I combined two poems, because the first part is this very short poem where he talks about the civil war in Italy. And he says, funerals in Italy's hard times when Roman discord hunted her citizens. This was especially painful for me, my Etruscan soil. You allowed my relatives' limbs to go abandoned. You cover the poor man's bones with no earth.
I do have it, yeah, I've got it here as well, yeah.
Umbria, he talks about Umbria, where he was from. And then we added this bit about...
Wolf of Mars.
Yeah, Rome, exactly. I guess that's all it. Yeah, all you see, my friend, the magnificent heart of Rome, was hill and grass before Phrygian Aeneas. So the conceit there is like he's looking at Rome in his day, which was quite grand, and he's saying, like, imagine this. At one point, there were just cattle wandering through here. There were no temples to the gods here, no senate, no theater. All of this life was very simple. And then, yeah, Wolf of Mars, what battlements grew from your milk, that's Romulus and Remus. And then back again with Umbria. And there he's comparing himself, he says, Umbria, land of the Roman Callimachus. So he's referring to himself and comparing himself to...
What is Callimachus?
So he was a Hellenistic poet.
Oh, that's right.
He was influential on the Roman poets, and he was a very kind of, again, to use that word, very erudite. Like his poems had a lot of sort of almost like secret knowledge in them that if you were hip, you knew about.
I loved these words that when you start, because it's quite tense, the music that it's quite a tense line, it's quite taut. Until you get to this part, to me, Bacchus, extend your leaves of ivy. And then I really went into a very lyrical thing there. It was almost like a sort of release from all of that tension of the previous part. That it was sort of seemed a fertile part of the work, of the poem, of the words. It suddenly seemed, I could see those leaves of ivy, and it felt, what's the word? Abundant. That bit, to me, Bacchus is extend your leaves of ivy, that Umbria swelling with my books be proud. I remember the music swelling there as well.
Right, well, you're very sensitive to those changes, which I also appreciate, because there are a lot of them in Propertius's poetry. Like it goes from a kind of high language to low language.
That's what makes it interesting, because it has a sort of musical aspect in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's inherent in it and in your translation, obviously, because it's to do with your translation as well. Someone else might not have.
Right.
Well, I haven't ever read any other translations, but I'm sure that your sensitivity to the musicality of poetry is also, a reason why it feels so musical.
That is there, yeah, definitely. And his use of meter is really interesting. It's very
really interesting.
experimental, and some people think that it's wrong in the sense that, you know, these books, these poems came down to us as copies of copies, you know, through the centuries. So a lot of times there were mistakes made in the copies, like somebody was dozing off while they were copying page 295 and they made a mistake. So some people read Propertius's poetry and say like, well, this can't be because his meter is too crazy. But I feel like he was a little crazy. he was improvising. He was starting from
the poets are quite crazy, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a lot of racy parts. We have some. At least we have. There's another aria I wanted to ask you about, which is the one that Cynthia sings while there's light.
Light.
Yeah.
Got the words about here too.
Lucky me, radiant night, in you couch made fertile by my pleasures.
I love that one. That was particularly appealing. Well, I don't know why that was the first one I did, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first one, and that one I think.
Was that the first thing you suggested?
Maybe, yeah. I feel like that one's very immediate, and also it's also melancholic, right? I mean, the way it ends, it's exciting, but also there's this sort of sadness to it.
There's a thing about mortality, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I just want to pull the words up because I love them so much. I think she's just been with her lover, hasn't she? She spent the night with her lover. Because it says here, she's in her boudoir in front of a mirror, and her room is sophisticated in its appointments. Her handmaiden is behind her, combing her hair and listening to her tale. So she's recounting the night she spent with her lover, Propertius, the poet. And
so by the way, I changed, in order to make the libretto, I had to make some changes to create, I wanted to create some, you know, more drama, some dramatic encounters. So, because in the poems, they're all just basically spoken by the narrator. In other words, he speaks these words. We just get it as a poem. But
oh yeah, so you put it into her mouth now, these words.
Her mouth, and then that's why. So when it says there, I push open his lids. You know, first I wrestle him with naked breasts is like probably first I wrestle you with naked breasts.
They make love and he's fallen asleep immediately, and she's cross.
Yeah. So all of that happens in the poem, but he's narrating it in his poem, and here she's narrating it. So to change some of the pronouns and things like that.
You wanted to ask me something about it?
No, well, I was just
wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it up because I feel like it is one of the ones that that sort of struck us both the most so far.
Very sensual. It's very sexy and sensual, and it has a sort of slight brutality, doesn't it, as well?
It does, yeah.
I mean, it's that thing about her battered arms and showing them to her mum.
Yeah.
He's quite a possessive lover, isn't he? He's very possessive. He's sort of obsessed with her body and possessive. And then there's that whole part at the end, while the fates permit us, let us sate our eyes on sex, a long night is coming for us, daylight never to return. And that really got me. I thought that was very moving and sort of quite frightening and truthful. Like, you never know when pleasures in life, or pleasure, or even comprehension of life is going to be, or even life, You know, my mum got Alzheimer's, and my mum had Alzheimer's and she's passed away now. And she was divorced from my father, and I had this fantasy, I think I wrote it to you, that she would go into a care home and meet the love of her life. And there was a man there, and he was like some kind of a retired army major or something, like her dad, and he was, you know, perfect for her really, but you know, and he used to stare at her and she used to stare back, but you know, they were both sort of completely fading, and of course there would never be any chance of whatever Cynthia and her lover get up to. And I think I was writing that around the time my mum was going into care as well, so I was sort of struck with the fact of, you know, a life coming to a close in a,
I remember that, yeah.
sadly, in a sad way, really, and the fading away of earthly things, and the fading away of, you know, being able to even comprehend really any kind of intimacy with another human being, let alone actually have it. So I think I was quite affected at that time by.
Yeah, I feel like in Propertius, you know, there's that famous poem by Horace with the line "Carpe diem," where we get that phrase from, and so it's kind of a motif in classical poetry, you know, like, and even with the idea of carpe literally means to pluck, like to pluck a flower. So it's like, you know, gather you ye rosebuds while ye may. It's a standard riff in a way in poetry.
Yeah.
But I feel like in this poem, he sort of reinvents anytime he uses those ideas, because I feel like he's improvising. I mean, that's my impression of how he wrote. Like, I feel like he.
Isn't there?
That's what we were talking about earlier.
That word, but
he internalized a lot of you know, previous, and then he just.
Yes, the very last line is, "It's the same for us lovers who now do breathe vigorously. Perhaps tomorrow shuts in our fate." And it was the "t" on the word fate that just seems to shut the door, and it's so phonetic and so, I don't know, it illustrates the actual sound of the word fate. It's like it's like a door shutting, it's like a slamming door or something. That's how I felt it.
That's so interesting. That makes so much sense. I feel like I should make a lot of those choices intuitively, or as you said, musically, but now that you're explaining it, yeah, it definitely works that way.
I think words, I feel that words very physical, and I often see them in a very sort of physical, almost a physical, three-dimensional, because they are a sound, aren't they? And a sound that's descriptive of the thing itself. That's why the sound has been made.
So what do we have to do next? That's our question, right?
We have to finish this while there's light, and we have to see it on a production of it, and get it fully funded, and probably start with a sort of workshop somewhere.
Okay.
Workshop it, and then eventually bring it to the stage, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that intrigues both of us is, you know, we're here in 2020, and these poems were written around, you know, in the 1st century BC. So I think that's part of the thing that is intriguing, is like this, we're collaborating with this person from thousands of years ago. And then also, I mean, is there any way in which you could say that your mix of heritages informs the music for this piece, or is that not relevant to this particular project?
Well, I think it does on an unconscious level, because that's just how I write music, the way maybe my vocabulary as a composer, my inflection, the inflections of the music and stuff, but I haven't consciously sat down and tried to put something in there that's
right. No.
I don't think I really do that anyway. It's not really my thing. I'm not really sort of into sort of conscious fusion.
Okay.
I'm more into searching out my own language, if that makes any sense.
Totally. No, to me.
That's not that I wouldn't include things, that or sometimes pull something that's very definitively from, say, the East, or if that's a word you can use, or that the South Asia or Arabic music, or actually, I was just thinking when you said, this is slightly off the subject, but when you mentioned that thing about a string of little lights right back at the beginning, and I'd written that in that piece that you put into Vanitas, that I just suddenly realised when you read it that I had just before that played an actual concert with Talvin Singh in the East End for Diwali, and there was a string of little lights. How the Diwali festival is about strings of lanterns. So that obviously, and I didn't actually consciously stick that in there, but it obviously had gone in somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah. Does that answer your question about the?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about like how we should frame this project currently, because I know that people are looking for things that are showing connections, I think.
I think just inherently, that's what I do. I have these connections, and I do draw from them. But it's not something I do sort of self-consciously, or because I don't see the point of that, in a way. If I thought the sound of a tabla would be right for a certain piece, then I would use it, and it would occur to me to use it possibly more than it would occur to a white European English or completely English person, because it's part of my vocabulary.
Well, I really like what you've done so far. I feel like the mix of, to me, what I hear is like kind of like some classical sounds, some electronic sounds.
Well, can I ask you, what do you think is it about Propertius that drew you? What is it about Latin that drew you? What were the ancient poets? What ancient Roman poet? What is it about the classics that draws you as an American?
Well, there are a few things. One, I started with Latin when I was about 11 years old in school. And so I was immediately attracted to the language, and I feel like just the inherent qualities of it, its kind of declensions of nouns and conjugations of verbs. And I realized that it was like one of the bases of English, and then later I learned it was the basis of many other languages. So that kind of, it feels valuable in that sense. Like it's not a dead language. It's still living in French and in Spanish and in German. So that was the first attraction. I think it was kind of like a puzzle in a way, like a kind of mystical, like a puzzle with a very strong relation to reality. And then I think I was, those were kind of my incipient days of being a poet too. So as time went on, we started to read Virgil and then Catullus. And Catullus was really exciting, not just because it's very racy, but just also because of the way he uses language. It just seems very informal in a way, which I always find that attractive. I like formality, but I also like informality. And then it wasn't until I got to university that I read the poetry of Propertius, and that was a class that I took in that. genre is called Latin Love Elegy, which is also includes Ovid and Tibullus. And then that was like an electric shock of a connection where I said that this poet is like I'm totally on his wavelength. I totally get where he's coming from. And yeah, I mean, I think there are things like that in your life where you feel that connection to someone else's art. And it's really exciting because it's kind of like that artist becomes like a teacher to you, even though a teacher and a friend in his case, because he, as I said, is kind of.
I did it with some quite odd.
Say that again.
No, I'm just thinking. I sometimes just get obsessed with even some quite middle of the road singer or something, you know, because I find something that I'm suddenly a light on something that I find fascinating in a voice or a song or something.
Right, they're very specific, and I feel like that as time goes on, I don't know if you've probably felt something similar, but I feel like I become more and more open to different things, like things that I might have written off, and I think that's natural in a way. I think when you're young, you want to focus on something that is your thing, and you take that and you kind of ride it, and then
as a late teenager, I was playing always in these youth orchestras and things, you know, and I had this bizarre idea that you should never ever remember the name of a composer ever, that you should only remember the piece and the notes, and that it really didn't matter who wrote it because it was just a sort of pool of music in the universe, and it didn't really belong to anybody, so you shouldn't. And it was really, I was militant about it. I just would refuse to remember who wrote things, but I could probably remember that, you know, the entire viola parts for a particular symphony or something, but I just would forget the composer deliberately.
You kind of have to go out of your way to do that. You have to go out of your way to do that in a way.
Yeah,
right?
no, I did, and I don't know. I really don't know where I got that idea, and I'd be mortified if someone forgot that I wrote the music. Now I'm on the other side of it, you know.
Yeah.
It's odd though, but I suppose I still believe that in a way, that we're all just kind of manifesting something, you know, that's we're just passing through and we manifest something. And
There is this, I mean, I think definitely like the mystique of the artistic genius is overrated. And I think that's why people are drawn to collaboration. But, you know, collaboration is not easy. I think in music, you're accustomed to it because music is basically collaborative. Right? I mean, not exclusively, but a lot of the time it is. Whereas writing,
I spent a long time alone though. I spent, you know, when I decided to learn to produce, I spent literally apart from talking to you and maybe a couple of other people about things, I spent an awful lot of time on my own. I deliberately trying to find my own language. I wasn't collaborating with other musicians at all, really. Kind of working alone, and I didn't want to really collaborate with anybody at that time. But I think it gets lonely just being stuck in your own thing, and even just lonely stuck in your own you know, as a musician, just with other musicians. Or I draw a lot from collaboration with people who are working in other disciplines. I find I really need that. It inspires me to work with you, a poet, with a dancer, with someone who's with a filmmaker. I love that. I find that, you know, visual arts are really, really important to me. They, you know, I spend a lot of time around visual artists and people who are interested in visual art, and I find it kind of, you know, very inspiring.
Yeah, I think
It's
collaboration.
almost that I need these sort of cross-disciplinary things more than I need other musicians, to tell you the truth. Other musicians I do obviously completely appreciate, and I think I feel very lucky at the moment with the musicians that I know, with the wonderful musicians I've been able to work with in the last few years. And but I also love to work with, you know, I'm triggered by other disciplines.
Well, I love collaborating with you, and I hope we can.
Thank you, Vincent.
Do that.
Me too. And I really think we should get this opera on the road. Otherwise, we're going to be ancient history before it's done. We have brought it to the South Bank, even the little bits, right? We brought some of the work I've done with you to the South Bank.
Yeah, no, we've done it, I think, 3 times, right?
3 times?
Well, we did South Bank, we did that place.
The Great Austin Studios.
And then you didn't you do something at King's Place?
At King's Place. That's where I did the Roman, how'd you say it? You say it in a different way to me.
Callimachus.
Callimachus.
Yeah.
The Roman Callimachus.
Yeah.
And While There's Light. Yeah.
We've done two versions
that
of
great singer Sarah, I don't know how to say her name, Bushy.
Very good, yeah.
She was great, and Lauren Kinsella sang it before. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
So
let's keep doing it. But yeah, let's really think about how to get this put together. I think workshop is the way to go.
Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? Do you think we've got enough pieces now?
Yeah, I think so.
We can start with the pieces we've got.
Well, to make a proposal, yeah.
Yeah, because we've got them recorded, haven't we?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Always good to talk to you.
Thank you, Vincent. You too. I'll switch off the recording.
Okay.